I guess we can get started now. So as everyone starts to trickle in, I just want to remind people of some housekeeping items. So while we're waiting for everyone to sign on, please plug in your device to make sure that you don't run out of power. And to improve performance, please shut down all other applications on your desktop other than Zoom. And for the best viewing of both the slides and speakers, it's recommended to use the side-by-side view in Zoom, and everyone is muted upon entry, and all lines will remain muted during the broadcast. And we welcome everyone to please turn their cameras on. So for the agenda today, we will start with a welcome by Mr. Ken Chan and then opening remarks by Dr. Jiang Lan, followed by remarks from Senator Scoofus and Assemblyman Schmidt, and then we will move on to the panel discussion. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Shi, and I'm currently a sophomore at the Hotchkiss School, and I will be the facilitator for tonight's panel discussion to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, first known as Asian Pacific American Heritage Week from 1978 to 1992. The first week of May was chosen to commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese to the US on May 7th of 1843, and it marked the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, where over 20,000 Chinese laborers helped in the building process. This national observance is a time for communities to not only recognize the contributions and rich history of Asians and Pacific Islanders in America, but also the hate that we have faced and received. In tonight's panel discussion featuring Mr. Roger Tall, Ms. Katie Ruo, and Ms. Rachel Scherr, all of whom are college students or young adults and are members of our OCCA community and even graduates of the Chinese school. Mr. Roger Tall is unable to attend this Zoom meeting tonight, but he has recorded a few recordings sharing his opinions and perspective as an Asian American. Our goal for this meeting is to explore and understand the challenges, experience, and characteristics of the Asian identity on a deeper level. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Ken Chan, principal of the Orange County Chinese School, to give a few opening remarks. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Ken Chan, and I'm the principal of the Orange County Chinese School. May 1st is the start of the Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month, a celebration of Asian and Pacific Islanders in the United States. As a first-generation immigrant, I am proud to call myself an Asian American who values the traditions of our past, but also looks forward to the assimilation of our country with purpose and positive social action. We must remember the past, our ancestors, our history, respect the culture and traditions, but also look forward to the future with increased pride of who we are and how we can educate our future leaders through awareness, with dignity, activism, and for social equality. Please enjoy today's program to celebrate the AAPI Heritage Month, and thank you for the continued support for our Orange County Chinese School. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. And now I would like to invite Dr. Jiang Lan, Vice President of the OCCA, to give a few welcome remarks as well. And she only sent in an audio recording, but we can still enjoy her experiences and thoughts surrounding APAHM.
Dear honorable guests, OCCA community, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Lan Jiang, and I am the Vice President of OCCA. It gives me great pleasure to attend this online discussion session organized by our youth group. It is of particular significance that this discussion takes place at a time of Asian Pacific Islanders Heritage Month. Throughout American history, AAPIs have made great contributions to the development of American society. Currently, there are about 23.2 million AAPIs in the United States, accounting for about 7% of the American population. President Biden said, from laying railroad tracks, tilling fields, to starting business, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are deeply rooted in the history of the United States. Many members of the US Congress and local political leaders have emphasized that as part of the overall United States fabric, the history of AAPIs is the history of Americans. However, over the past year and more, many of AAPIs have become the victims of hate crimes and racial discrimination, and most of the victims were ethnic Chinese. At the same time, we have seen that President Biden issued a proclamation on Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month on 2021. Pledging to fight for racial equality. Moreover, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act was passed and signed into law. As people celebrate AAPI's Heritage Month, they can gain a deeper understanding of how important respect and tolerance for the cultural traditions of all ethnic groups is to the development of a diverse country as America. But is celebrating the history and culture of Asian Americans all enough? Members in our youth group here are US citizens, and you also share unbreakable blood ties and cultural bonds with China and Chinese. I really do hope that you can leverage your unique knowledge and experiences to promote friendship and advance cooperation between the two countries. It is only natural for things to be different, and that the world become wonderful as it is colorful. United is strength, I believe. Let's all continue to play a positive role in realizing constructive development of a relationship featuring no conflict, no confrontation, and mutual respect. Thank you very much. Dear Honorable.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for your wonderful remarks. Now I would like to turn it over to Senator James Scoofus, who will be giving a few remarks as well about his experience with Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And Senator Scoofus is the New York State Senator for the 39th District. He is also the chairman of Committee on Investigations and Government Operations. He has been an active member and supporter of our OCCA community for a long time, participating in numerous events such as the Chinese Lunar New Year Gala. And now I'd like to turn it off to him.
Hello to all of my friends in the Orange County Chinese Association. Thank you, as always, for the opportunity to offer some brief remarks and for the honor of inviting me to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month with you. Since the 16th century, Asians and Pacific Islanders have had a profound impact on the land that is now the United States. From a cultural, social, and economic perspective, Asian Pacific Islanders have been an integral part of the United States and have made countless contributions to the success of this country. It is especially important to remember and celebrate these contributions and achievements now, as the AAPI community has faced outrageous bigotry and tragic, senseless violence, particularly over the course of the past 2 years during the pandemic. I want to say to you in no uncertain terms that I will do all that I can to not only keep the AAPI community safe, but also work to ensure that society comes together in such a way that we offer greater recognition and prosperity for the Asian and Pacific Islander community. I wish you all the best and a momentous, successful Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you, Senator Scoofus. It's always wonderful to see your participation in these events. Now we would like to give our final opening remarks to Assemblyman Colin Schmidt, who is a representative for the New York Assembly, District 99. He is also the corporal in the Army National Guard, and he has also been a longtime supporter to our OCCA community, participating in these virtual events and our annual Lunar New Year Gala as well.
Hi, it's Assemblyman Colin Schmidt from the 99th Assembly District. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in your celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. President George H.W. Bush expanded this celebration to be a month long in recognition of the contributions of Asian Americans to our national history and as well as our state history here in New York is substantial. Particularly, I think back to Norm Mineta, who passed away just a few weeks ago. Norm, Secretary Mineta, is the first Asian American cabinet secretary in US history. I was able to meet him while a college student, and his bipartisan legacy is one that will stand the test of time. I want to thank everybody for your continued leadership in the community. I want to thank everybody for your partnership at state government level. And as always, if you ever need anything, please feel free to contact me and reach out to my office. Have a great rest of your celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Colin Schmidt. And as we move on to the panel discussion now, I'll first introduce all three of our panelists before opening up the space for them. So the three panelists that are here tonight are Ms. Katie Luo and Ms. Rachel Scherr, and Mr. Roger Tall has recorded a few Zoom or a few video recordings in response to these questions, and we can hear his insight through that. So Dr. Roger Tall is the campus director for the Art of Problem Solving, a math and language arts focused academy in Bellevue, Washington. And prior to his current role, Dr. Tall was an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. He has a PhD in English with a focus in language and rhetoric from the University of Washington. And he also has experience teaching writing in a variety of contexts, from running poetry workshops with the 4th and 5th graders to leading college level rhetoric courses. And now I would like to turn it over to him to share a little bit more about himself.
Hello, everyone. First off, I want to thank Jeffrey for organizing this event, and I want to thank him for inviting me to be a panelist. Unfortunately, I had to cancel at the last minute because of a conflict with my work. I currently live on the West Coast, so the time zone difference created a bit of a conflict. Nevertheless, I've recorded some of my responses to the questions that Jeffrey shared with me in hopes of helping drive some of our conversation today. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Roger Chow. I grew up in Orange County, New York. Specifically, I graduated from Pine Ridge High School in 2006. I went to the University of Buffalo for my undergraduate, and that is where I got my degree in English. After that, I moved to Seattle, where I worked on my PhD in English, and I graduated from the University of Washington with my PhD in 2017. It was that same year that I took a job in Detroit, Michigan, where I was an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric at Oakland University, which is this university near Detroit. But since then, just actually this past summer, my partner and I, we moved back to Seattle. So right now I am living in the Seattle area. I am currently the campus director for the Art of Problem Solving, which is an academy that specializes and focuses on math and language arts classes. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I'm looking forward to sharing out some of my thoughts on these questions today.
Thank you, Roger, for sharing a little bit more about yourself. So our next panelist for tonight is Miss Katie Yua, and she is a UX designer and has a Master in Fine Arts and Creative Writing graduate based in New York City. She's an active volunteer at the Wild Bird Fund Rescue, and much of her time outside of work is spent weightlifting, hiking, or gaming. Catalyzed by the tragedy of George Floyd's murder in May 2020, she has since devoted much more time to learning about POC history in America and how social forces have sculpted identities, cultures, and biases throughout history. And our final panelist for tonight is Miss Rachel Scherr, and she was born and raised in Orange County, New York, and graduated from Goshen High School in 2019. She is currently in her third year at Cornell University and is studying in the School of Hotel Administration. So before we kick off our panel discussion with this question, I would just like to let everyone know that if you guys have any questions throughout this panel discussion, please send me a private chat and we will have time left over for an open discussion where everyone in the audience has the opportunity to ask these wonderful panelists tonight any questions that they have or thoughts that they want to share. So the first question is, in America, there are so many ethnicities and cultures blended together, each having their own distinct qualities and features. What do you think are the characteristics of being Asian American, and how has it changed over time? And the first question is directed to Dr. Roger Tall, who has already recorded a response to this question.
So one of the questions Jeffrey asked was, what do you think are the characteristics of being Asian American, and how has it changed, for example, compared to our parents? So I thought about this question a lot, and I thought about maybe sharing out what I thought are some of the positive, I think, characteristics of the Asian American identity, as well as some of maybe the disadvantages or the drawbacks of the Asian American identity. So in terms of the positives, I do think Asian Americans, one of our defining characteristics is our familial bond. So the relationship that we have with our families. Compared to some of my non-Asian friends, I feel like this is a feature in my life that is very important and is something that I rely on. I think that it's a relationship with my family that has gotten stronger over time. I think that growing up, I was a bit more, let's say, rebellious, I guess, and I didn't always want to be part of the family. But as I've gotten older, this bond with my parents and my sister have only gotten stronger. I just think, like, in terms of being, I guess, not just Asian American, but Asian in general, there's sort of a sense of a responsibility to take care of your family members. I never once considered, for example, of putting my parents in an old people's home when they got older. I just sort of always assumed and expected that if they ever got to a point where they needed some assistance, that they would move in with me. So I do think, and I do appreciate this kind of relationship and this sense of responsibility that I share. Another pro that I think another positive of the Asian American identity, maybe not even Asian American, just the Asian identity in general. I do think that there's a lot of pop culture and overall cultural influence that comes from Asian culture. So what I mean by that is, I think if you examine some of the things that are popular in pop culture or some of the things that are trending, we often see that coming out of Asian culture, right? Things like, K-pop, things like, dramas that are on TV. You even think about some things like cuisine, right? Like sushi nowadays is seen as such a mainstream dining option. So I think like when you look at some of the cultural details of America and you trace them back, I think a lot of that comes from some sort of Asian influence, and I'm really proud of that. Some of the, I think, maybe drawbacks or maybe negative perceptions or negative characteristics of the Asian American experience is I do think that there is this outsider identity that is hard to shake. And what I mean by that is oftentimes I feel like Asian Americans are just naturally assumed to be immigrants or that we didn't grow up in the US. Even before we talk, even before we tell people our names, I think sometimes a lot of other Americans just sort of naturally assume that we did not grow up here. So this sort of outsider mentality, I think, can be difficult to deal with sometimes, especially if many of us see ourselves as Americans. And so to sort of have to defend that part of identity all the time, it can be stressful. Going back to Jeffrey's question, how do I think the sort of characteristics of the Asian American identity has changed compared to our parents? I do think that our generation and the generations that come after mine, I think there's a little bit more freedom in terms of our options, in terms of careers and life goals. Many of our parents are immigrants and they came to the US with one goal in mind, which was to establish a stable, financially sound life for the rest of their family and children. And I think that forced a lot of our parents down a very narrow career path. And I think now we see a lot of Asian Americans branching out into a wide array of career paths, life paths. We see many people exploring the arts, music. So that's one sort of detail about the Asian American identity that I do think has changed a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Roger, for your insight. I think it's definitely apparent, and I can definitely agree on the points said, because the familial roles and also like that outsider mentality has been very has played many key and crucial parts in our lives, where despite being like Asian born Chinese people, we still have an American mentality and our culture along with it. And sometimes it could cause tensions, but I think that most of the time we can live in harmony with them and take advantage of it. And I hope that these ideas sparked some more ideas for our panelists tonight. And I would like to turn it over to them. We can start off with Katie first, and then Rachel can jump in whenever.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. So I definitely agree with Roger's points about the outsider identity is huge. That happens like today to this day. Like there will be random people who ask me or directly assume I'm from China, even though like they have literally no reason to believe so, despite like literally just based on appearance. There are things people say that I question whether they would say to me if they thought I was American as opposed to Chinese or Asian. And I think that is definitely a prevalent effect of appearing Asian in America today. But the pros, yeah. I do think there is a deep culture of community over individual that is instilled in Asian American culture and life. There's a large emphasis on sort of familial duty, and you are more than just your own desires and you're part of a community. That's, I think, in itself, sort of a double-edged sword, because when you don't have an individual self, you run the risk of completely losing your actual sense as an individual. And Turning Red, if you've seen that, really tackles this like perfectly. When you're bearing the weight of a million other people's pressures, you often lose yourself. And that's a problem a lot of children, I think, have, as opposed to parents who have done a lot of hard work, like pouring blood, sweat, and tears into building a really good life here. But the tension that comes from like sort of seeing the American culture and then growing up in a very other specific Asian culture, while that can be a way to forge bonds within fellow Asian members and within your own family, can also be sort of a vice grip where, you know, it's a great thing when you have moderation from either side and you're in the middle. But I would say that, yeah, I agree with Roger, and I would add that little like nuance in, and especially agree on the fact that culture is really shifting towards a lot of things that come from Asia. For example, like K-pop is huge, anime is huge, like video games are bigger than ever, and they started, you know, like the tyrant, not the tyrants, but like the giants of the time are like Nintendo, Konami, Sony, like those are all like very Asian based. And I think that's only going to grow, especially because like I don't know if you people have seen like the way beauty standards are changing currently, from the Kim Kardashian model to like the K-pop model. This is pretty interesting, but I think a grander awareness of that is also coming in, and it's really interesting to see how that identity is sort of forming and shaping. And of course, like every city has a million boba spots now. Like I don't think you would have seen that 10 years ago. But yeah, that's where I sort of agree and sort of add my own thoughts with Rogers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to what Katie and Roger have already said, I definitely agree with most of the points that they've made. And I can definitely relate to when Katie spoke about how a lot of Asian Americans feel like they have an obligation to their family, or a lot of the pressures that come with being Asian American. When I was thinking about this question, like one word that came to mind was hardworking. And I think all of the people I grew up, all of my Asian American friends are some of the most hardworking people I know. And a lot of us strive to be the best in what we are doing, whether it's academically, athletically, musically, and a lot of us are the best. So, but I think that that's something that has not changed from our parents' generation too, is that hardworking mentality. Maybe I think one aspect of it that has changed is maybe what we're working towards, but I think overall, yeah, I agree with a lot with what Katie and Roger said.
Yeah, I think to echo off the, I guess, differences between the Asian and the Asian American identity, because I believe all of us are ABCs, Asian born Chinese people in the US. We definitely take characteristics from our parents, but as well, we develop our own through American society. And I was wondering, like, is there a drastic difference between your own experience as an Asian American compared to your parents? And we talked about like the hardworking aspect, but has there been any other influences, I'd say, to your lives, whether from American society or from your parents?
Jeff?
Yep.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure. Jump in. Feel free.
Actually, I was amazed that to hear you kids talking about your identity as American-born Chinese. So I just want to jump in with my experiences and some of my study findings as first generation of a Chinese immigrant. Actually, when we're talking about Asian Americans, I don't have a standing point to speak for all Asians, but so right here, I believe I'm focusing on ethnic Chinese. As ethnic Chinese, immigrants to America. Do you know when? Do you know when Chinese start to get into America?
I believe the mid 19th century, or is it dates farther back, 1700s? I'm not
About
too sure.
that time, so like loads of uh 4 loads of those cheap labor ships that ships Chinese coming into this new land, and most of them are from Fujian and Canton, only those 2 provinces. And when they got here, they were just cheap laborers for a railroad and other gold mining stuff. They're just completely cheap laborers. And when I actually came to here on 1991, till today, I don't really go to Chinatown. I don't like Chinatown because Chinatown was a place for them, for those early group of Chinese immigrants to just stay there. Several block of streets, they have to stay there, and in there, couldn't get out. Today, even today, till today, if you talk with some older residents in Chinatown, they will tell you that all the hopes that they have for their kids, it's get into mainstream, forget their Chinese identity. Don't speak Chinese, don't use chopsticks, just become a member in the mainstream. I was kind of shocked when I actually get to talk with them, interview them, because after I came here, I don't feel that I'm out of the mainstream. Teaching in a university and, well, interact with our neighbors and people in town, or with my students, colleagues, I am member of a mainstream. So the differences is here actually lead to a new term called New Generation Chinese Immigrants. This new generation of Chinese immigrants, it's me and your parents. We are, in general, this group of new generation Chinese immigrants were well educated in China. And when we came here, we got better educations. And then when we get to our mid-age, we actually basically stay in the society that definitely not blue colors anymore. So that differences, that change has something to do with China's change. Okay, China opened to the world on 1982. That is a big timeline for the older generation Chinese immigrants and us. That makes tremendous differences here. And the other thing about Chinese culture into the West, actually, the first booming age, the first booming time, it was back to last century, around the first 3 decades after the World War II, when American society gets so many conflicts, facing many difficulties, and many people are starting to doubt on their like their Christian believing. They turn to the Eastern culture. When we talk about Eastern culture, Asian culture in particular, Asian culture that's actually rooting on Chinese culture. When we talk about world culture in history, it was Greek, Hebrew, and Chinese. So American people start to learn from Chinese, and then when it gets to 50s and 60s, there is another wave of learning from Chinese culture. So you will find a lot of things, like Chinese things here and there, including Chinese thoughts, literature, poetry, including Buddhism. I believe you've heard a word Zen, Z-E-N, right?
Yep.
Know what is Zen? Zen, it's a very typical a very typical Chinese thought. I can't say it's religious. It's not religion to me. It's like a part of Buddhism, part of Taoism, and part of Confucianism. So gets into America, becomes Zen, and this Zen thing now it's very popular. So other than the pop cultural things here and there that you kids see, actually there are more Chinese cultural influences in the bigger, in a bigger, a broader aspect of American culture.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience and your experience with the Asian identity. And I think this is a nice segue to our next question, which talks about the Asian American identity and how it's impacted each one's life. So for the second general question, we have, how has your Asian American identity impacted or shaped your life? And can you share any of the experiences or challenges and even thoughts that you have faced in the past? And like the first question, we'll direct it to Roger first before turning it over to the panelists.
So in terms of the question, how has my Asian American identity impacted or shaped my life? I would say that it has had such a profound impact on how I see myself, and this self-perception has evolved so much over time, and it's, I think, still continuing to evolve. One of the things that really bothered me, I think, growing up was being Asian, and I'm almost ashamed to say that now, but there were times growing up where all I wanted to do was fit in. But growing up where I grew up, it was really hard to fit in. My high school, Pine Bush High School, there were just not a lot of other Asian students in the school, and so I really felt like I stuck out a lot. It just, when you're a kid, right, all you want to do is fit in with everyone else. And so when you grow up in an environment where you don't see other people that look like you, it's really hard to get a sense of that. I have this other really distinct memory. In third grade, my third grade teacher wanted to celebrate or put on this whole thing for Chinese New Year. And one of the things that we did as a class was we built this like paper mache dragon, which looking back was like a great idea. It was really cool. But we built this like paper mache dragon, and then me and two other students were like in it. And then the rest of the class, we like walked through the hallway of the school and like really, made it seem like a Chinese New Year's parade. And all I remember at that, I have such a distinct memory of like being in the dragon, marching down the hallway and just wanting the whole experience to be over, because I just hated how much attention it drew to me and how much attention it drew to my culture. But looking back on this experience, and also just looking back on who I am as an individual, I've come to a point where like I truly embrace my individuality now, and I come to embrace being Asian now. It's something that I love. It's something that I'm truly proud of. But it was something that it took me a long time to get to this point. I think some other challenges that really molded me as when I was younger was, some of you might be able to relate to this. There were times where I felt too American for some of my Asian friends, especially those that maybe were that had more recently immigrated, or I felt too American compared to my family members in China. But then I was too Asian for some of my American friends, right? They, people would make remarks, friends would crack jokes. So I felt like I was caught in a space where I was too Asian for one population and not Asian enough for the other. Again, I think all of this fueled who I am now, and I can absolutely say I'm in a very comfortable place now where I embrace my identity, and I embrace this sort of unique place that I hold within the U.S. and within my community. And so, yeah, I guess overall, the sense of being different was a challenge when I was growing up. But the older I got, it was something that I embraced and I admired, and I was honored to be different. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger, for your insight and your opinions. And I think I can definitely echo off the fact that like it was difficult to embrace the differences of being Asian American, where you're torn between two identities. But I think like now for me personally, I am starting to embrace it more, where all the delicious foods in the culture, the different traditions, where I'm all starting like, I guess not growing into my skin, but more just embracing them in general. And I was just wondering, what does Katie and Rachel, what do you guys think about your Asian identity and how it's shaped or impacted your life?
I can jump in if Rachel's cool with that. Yeah, okay, so I'll just go right in. Like I will take what Roger said and like go a step further. Like in high school, like, and I talked to my friends in high school too, who were also Asian, like they agreed with me. I desperately wanted to be white. Like I was so, like I had this deeply internalized like racism towards Asian Americans in my, like deep in my body. And that wasn't something I really actually took the time to examine and unlearn until like my second year of college. And like growing up, I was literally like, oh, like I hate being Asian, I hate being Asian, I hate being Asian. And I specifically like did not want to be Chinese. I wanted to be white. And I think that speaks a lot to Roger's experience of like, oh, you don't really feel like you fit in, and it's easy to feel like an outsider. And I think for me, it's really similar. And when I was unpacking all of that and really thinking about, like where did that feeling come from? I just really had to look at like every life experience and like all the media we consumed growing up, where, like whether it was the kids, like squeezing their eyes at you in school hallways, or like watching movies and TV shows and like every single attractive protagonist and love interest is white, or like villains specifically are the people of color, or like all the stereotypes in movies, like, oh, Asians are always like the smart, like losers, or like the funny accents, like the men can never get the woman, etc. Like it's all these negative stereotypes in media. and that like feeds into you. Like I hated being Asian. I thought like I never wanted to date Asians in high school. Like I wanted to be white. And I think that's a standard that like when you look at like, you know, like beauty standards and like media and everything, representation matters a lot. And I think the lack of it, or like the very dominant negative representation presence, that fed a lot into my challenges growing up with like being Chinese and accepting that. And I think a lot of it was also tied very deeply to how I grew up. Like I mentioned, like when you have that really deep sense of familial ties, and everything you do is like an extension of your family. And if you fuck up or make a mistake, it's like your family's mistake, and it's like shame on everyone who knows you. That also was like traumatizing. And I thought if I was white, I would get rid of that, and like that would have never happened to me. So I think growing up and like really like maturing was like unpacking all of those feelings and realizing like all the thoughts that came from like the outside were the ones that caused me to hate myself, and my identity and my race. So I think just getting into that point in my adult life where I could realize like, wait a second, it literally benefits no one for me to hate who I am and like hate my ties, hate my history. That did a whole 180 for me in like actual life. And I'm still like trying to unlearn and embrace like Asian identity. But yeah, it was literally like, it took me like going through college and meeting someone like an international student from China who like I could actually relate to really unpack all of that. But I would say that's the biggest thing that challenged me when I was growing up as an Asian American person in school with Asian parents and like white friends and other Asian friends who also wanted to be white, or, you know, that whole thing. I think now with representation being far different and awareness and just the presence of online communities where there's more people like you, I think it's a lot more easy to not feel like you should hate yourself or that you don't fit in. And I hope that just continues to grow. The fact that diversity, we're seeing more and more of it. I just want that to like continue, because I think that would have been awesome if I was a kid and I got to see like, you know, Shang-Chi being cool. Sorry for my language, but yeah, that's like my whole spiel.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add on to everything Katie and Roger have said. I definitely can understand their perspectives. And I think Katie mentioned within the past couple of years, there's definitely also has been a shift that I guess even more people in my generation have seen in representation, because I feel like my experience, I grew up in Goshen, which was also a predominantly white high school. And I was maybe one of 3 or 4 other Asian kids in my grade. But looking back, I'm actually very grateful for that experience. I feel like if anything, my identity as Asian American helped me stand out in that setting. And I was given a lot of opportunities that I feel like actually my white classmates maybe weren't given because I was Asian. For example, in my high school, we did like cultural weeks. And I think this also goes back to Roger, his different experience like 10 years before when he was in high school. But I remember I was asked to like do the Pledge of Allegiance in Chinese, and I was asked to do a presentation on just like my culture and different experiences that like I've had. So yeah, I think some just like my Asian American, yeah, it's just something that I embrace and I'm very grateful for, especially when I come to college too. I think there's definitely a difference when you're in high school and college, because it's definitely a wider set of people. I mean, most of my classmates here are Asian, so I think it definitely influences that too.
Yeah, I also want to add, like, for the Asian American identity, like the culture that you have and that we have as Asians and our Chinese heritage is a new, or something that we can rely on, where we learn from our parents, like we said before in the first question, like the hard work that you learn from your parents. Because like my parents, they worked their butts off to get me and where we are today. And I think I've definitely fed off that energy into my high school experience so far. But also I've seen like the American culture as well, and that the opportunities there are here, and just the culture here is a direct contrast. But I think I've learned to find a balance between the two. And also adding on to what Katie said about representation in Asian American, I think for your identity, like we definitely have a louder and more active voice in the US, where, for example, the Marvel movie with featuring Simu Liu, the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, that I believe is the first ever Marvel superhero. And it goes to show the steps that our nation is taking to embrace our Asian identities and culture. And but also, despite all the positives, I think there are a lot of negatives as well. And that moves us on to our third question, which ties into the more negative aspects that we have experienced in our society, where, for example, the API hate, and it has a long and ugly history. And recently, in the light of the pandemic, it has spiked dramatically. And I was wondering how living with this pandemic and COVID-19 and the rise of hate that was caused by it affected you guys personally, and how do you practice resilience as an Asian American in today's less than optimal social landscape? And we'll hear from Roger first before we hear from our other panelists.
So one question that Jeffrey asked was, how has living, during the pandemic and in recent times with this rise of anti-Asian hate, how has that affected me personally? I think like a lot of us, like we've always dealt with microaggressions or even just outward explicit racist aggressions all our lives. But to be completely honest, I feel like I personally did not experience too much of any sort of direct confrontation or microaggression during the pandemic. However, I think there's a good reason for that. I think I have the privilege of being a male, right, an Asian American male, and I do think I have, some, I'm pretty tall. I have this beard, so I have some features that perhaps has deterred people from antagonizing me. But I will say though, my partner Kimmy, she's Japanese American, and it felt like she was getting so many she was telling me that she was getting so many like glances and comments like under people's breaths when she was going out, and when anti-Asian hate was sort of at its peak. And it made me really nervous. It made me really nervous to have her be out there by herself. Same as it went with my sister who lives in Manhattan and my mom. My sister Esther, she lives by herself in Manhattan. She rides public transportation. There were a lot of times where I was truly concerned if she was going to get attacked. And so I would say that I think I was lucky enough to not have dealt with really any noticeable aggression during, COVID and during the pandemic. But I did fear for the safety of my loved ones. I fear for the safety of my family and, and my girlfriend. And so, yeah, that was definitely something a little bit harder to deal with. Jeffrey also asked, how do you practice resilience as an Asian American in today's less than optimal social landscape? I think part of me just tries to not focus on that. I do think, compared to when I was younger, like in my teens and going through high school, I do feel like there's a lot more diverse Asian American representation in social media or on TV, on the internet. And I try to focus on those, those racist caricatures, those racist stereotypes that we deal with, they will unfortunately probably be there forever. And I've focused on those enough when I was younger, and I don't have any interest in continuing to keep up with those. What I try to do now is I try to focus on what I see as positive role models in the Asian American community, right? I'm interested in seeking out people, Asian Americans with diverse backgrounds, right? I'm interested in learning more about Asian Americans and their triumphs. And so I guess to answer Jeffrey's question, I practice resilience by trying to block out as much of the negative as I can and focusing on the positive, because there are a lot of positives out there. And you know, one of the follows Jeffrey asked was, how do you continue to affirm your identity in light of everything? So I think my last response sort of speaks to that. I also just, you know, I also just try to consume a lot of Asian American pop culture. One, because I find it genuinely interesting, and two, it's something that I do think helps remind me of who I am and where I came from, and yeah, so.
Well, thanks, Roger, for sharing your experiences and also the positives and negatives of your personal experience in dealing with AAPI hate. And now I'd like to open it up to Katie and Rachel to jump in and share their own thoughts.
Katie, I can start off, I guess. When I was thinking about this question, actually, Jeffrey, I feel like my response is actually quite similar to Brian's, even though I guess I don't have a beard like him. But I think I was also very lucky, and I'm very grateful that during the pandemic, I was also in my hometown. I think most of us were isolating. We didn't go out much. But I do remember seeing all of the news stories about the attacks and all of the incidents that were happening in the city. While I wasn't there firsthand, I still do also have like my grandparents, family, friends, and I guess similar to Brian, just that concern for their safety and that it was very real for them. I would love to hear like Katie speak more on this, because I know she is also living in the city right now too. But yeah, so that was something that I guess it's a different perspective, but that was their reality, and I was kind of on the outside, but while I didn't experience anything firsthand, it was something that was still very real that was going on. I guess to follow up with your other question, I think an interesting aspect of the question in general is how we kind of focus on the negative side of things too. And Roger also did touch on this. And I think that we're starting to see this change, but as a community, I think we have to start looking at it differently. And we, like, now more than ever, like, we have so many tools and resources, and there are like so many successful people within this community that there's so many success stories, but a lot of the times I feel like we end up focusing on these negative stories that happen, and that kind of becomes the image of the Asian American community. I think we need to start shifting towards showing everyone how strong and connected we are, like showing off these success stories, which is why I think these panels are so important, having and listening to everyone's experiences. I mean, from an outside perspective, there's always going to be like crazy people in the world, and you know, like, we can't control that, but what we can control is how we're reacting to these situations. And I think if we show the rest of the world how strong our community is, you know, no one is ever going to pick a fight with like the biggest kid on the playground or on the field. So I think if we present ourselves, if we continue to present ourselves in the way that we are, you know, there's definitely going to be a positive change in the future.
Yeah, I super agree with the last point. Like, being a louder voice, showing that we have a will to fight for ourselves and defend ourselves. That's a big thing, I think. When I have been in the city since, you know, like 2019, and I was there for all of like the worst of lockdown, and I was there for pretty much like all of 2021. I'm still here. And it's like every single time I read like a horrible news headline, it's always like an Asian woman, it's oftentimes an elder or someone older. And it's always the people who people perceive are the weakest that they can push around and they can actually hurt without any consequence, that are being attacked. And I think it's like an old stereotype about the Asian American community that like, oh, they're submissive, the women are submissive, like the people don't really fight for themselves, they keep their heads down and they work. I think the more active we are, the more dominant we are with our voices, and the more we kind of fight back socially, like on the internet, in any way we can. That's one of the ways we can sort of counteract those long-lasting stereotypes. And I think on the note of, like, oh, I've seen, oh yeah, another headline, like in my city, oh, at a train station I was at like literally 10 minutes ago. I think just besides me on like a micro level having to develop a lot of like street smart skills and like taking around pepper spray everywhere, I think it's also become a tool for me to actually like, it's a boon and a curse to live in the city because like, oh, everything's happening in the city, but also everyone is mobilizing in the city. Like I have gone to rallies, I've marched, I've been with protesting crowds. When you're in that like massive swarm of people who are all shouting the same thing and fighting for the same thing, that's extremely uplifting. I would say that's one of the ways like I felt my resilience grow, the way I felt my safety and sense of security grow. When you're out there, one of the chants that we shout a lot is, show me what community looks like, this is what community looks like, and like, who keeps us safe, we keep us safe. And that really is the truth when like you're on a train and there's no one else except for you and other passerby, and there's someone who could potentially start a fight, hurt you people, like they might have a weapon, like it's going to be the community that keeps people safe, especially if it's like a racially motivated thing. Like we have to stand up for each other. That's been a huge like affirmation and resilience practice for me personally. And just working on unlearning like a lot of any internalized racism I had, any bigotry I had, and just really feeling like, oh, even though a lot of really terrifying stuff is happening in the city, like look at all these people who are willing to stand up for everyone and take care of everyone. And there's a lot of really amazing volunteer initiatives and volunteer community leaders that are still active and doing a lot of things in that direction today. So besides, like me, like needing to keep my head on a swivel, I think like the fact that these things are happening has, the whole Newton's third law, equal and opposite force thing, for every really evil thing in the world, there's also a ton of really good people willing to fight that evil. I think that's been really true in Manhattan particularly. And that's been a way I've been like, kind of like, okay, like I'll be okay. Like, I know there are people out there that like I would fight for people and they would fight for me kind of thing. So I think that's a unique sort of like New York City perspective, but yeah, that's my whole like summary of like how it's affected my like living, and then what I tried to do to sort of balance that out. And then also like I have a lot of Asian American friends who are living in New York City. That's been a really nice thing for me. So like we keep in contact with each other. I would send out texts to like everyone every time a news headline would come out and like just check on them, and like we were there for each other. So I think it's really just like, it's amazing to be part of that community, even though, circumstances are not amazing, but that the power of that community, I think, is really unparalleled and just like really wholesome and great for me.
Well, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts. I definitely agree with everything that was said. I think that having a strong support system is key to practicing resilience and demonstrating like being able to voice your thoughts in the greater community to injustices or hate that everyone has faced. And I also think that like just we need to band together to like fight the injustices, because one voice is not gonna make great change. And moving on to our final question, it's how it's just offering like, do you guys have any suggestions to the OCCA youth or this community, the young community members in our OCCA? And we'll start off with Roger first.
All right, so Jeffrey asks, do you have any suggestions for our OCCA youth and SGA? Yeah, my biggest suggestion or my biggest piece of advice is keep up with your Chinese. I cannot stress that enough. Like, keep up with your Chinese. I'm sure many people have gone through Chinese school, maybe currently in Chinese school. I went through Chinese school for so many years, and I hated it. I hated Chinese school when I was going through Chinese school because it was on a Saturday. It ate up this whole day on my weekend that I wanted to be doing anything else, you know? But when I look back on that, I'm really thankful that I stuck with it for as long as I did. And I truly felt like it gave me a foundation in Chinese that I otherwise would not have. And the thing about language is that language is this vehicle for culture. It is also, you know, it's a vehicle, it's a bridge for culture. By, you know, maintaining your Chinese, you're going to have this connection to family, you're going to have this connection to Asian culture that otherwise might become muted or lost entirely. And so if I had to give one piece of advice, and I promise you, your parents did not pay me to say this, it would be to continue to go to Chinese school and like really appreciate it. You know, it's something, yeah, I'm just really thankful that my parents kind of kept me in it. Other suggestions that I have would just be to, you know, like join different, you know, Asian American clubs, groups at your school. You know, if you're in college, you're heading to college, or if you plan on going to college, like that's one of the cool things about what I think about college is that it all of a sudden opens up your world to all these new people from these different walks of life. And so it's a great opportunity to meet other Asian Americans with very diverse backgrounds. And, you know, if you're not in college or that's not where you see your life going, I think you can still seek out groups, you can still seek out clubs and just, you know, meeting other Asian Americans is something that's very integral and important, especially in terms of building community. So yeah, so those are my two suggestions. One, continue going to Chinese school, maintain your Chinese, and two, you know, join some clubs and join some groups.
Thank you, Roger, for sharing some insight and suggestions for our community. Now I'd like to turn it over to Katie and Rachel to offer any suggestions for either in support of like APA month or just life in general.
I can quickly hop in. I think I definitely agree with everything Roger said. And yeah, he has some great advice. My addendum and or like personal advice based on my experiences growing up, my biggest thing would probably be like, just don't be afraid to be who you are, because like I was, and it was all based in the wrong fears and like the wrong worries. I just went through like so much unnecessary pain, like thinking like that wishing that I wasn't who I was, on a practical level, but also on an emotional, like spiritual level. Like it's so much easier to be yourself than to hate yourself, like, you know, but yeah, I would say like, you know, like eat the cultural food, like celebrate the holidays that no one else celebrates, like celebrate your features that are special, like screw European beauty standards or whatever else is like being fed through Instagram or whatever else. Like I wish like someone had just like taken teenager me by the shoulders and been like, just like, oh my God, just like accept who you are and like what you look like. Because like beauty and worth is not ever shaped by your physical appearance or like the shape of your body, anything like that. That's like my biggest, I think, like thing that I would tell myself, and I would tell like other people, students of any age, like, you know, like just love yourself and the people who also love you will come. You don't have to worry about the haters. Like that's the most platitude-esque thing ever, but I think it's rang true for me, and I hope other people can sort of benefit from that.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow up Katie, but yeah, I definitely agree with everything that was said, Roger and Katie both. I guess I know Katie and Roger both graduated, but as someone who's in college still, emphasis on what Roger said, surround yourself with Asian American other Asian Americans. I mean, here at school, I've gotten involved with like the Chinese Christian community, and they've been a great support system for me. And yeah, also your family too. I think once you leave, you go off to college, you graduate, you don't realize, I mean, you don't have anyone to cook for you too, I guess, but you don't realize how important family is. So tell your parents you appreciate them, and yeah, enjoy your time at home before you graduate.
Yeah, thank you guys for your advice and wisdom that you guys shared with our community. And yeah, I think it's important, like you are who you surround yourself with, and like your family is a crucial part in your life, and definitely cherish your opportunities with them. And as we wrap up our final question, I would like to open it up to our community members for any questions or concerns that they have. They can just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question. Well, if nobody has any question.
Jeffrey,
Yep.
the quick question.
Yep, Dr. Wu.
Yeah, I think sorry about the delay. I have another meeting another 8 to 9 in Beijing time.
Mhm.
So I want you to share your personal experience. So how can you grow up as become the OCCA youth president in the past few years? So what do you gain for the Chinese? What do you gain in the past few years? What's encouraged to the young people?
So you're asking like what I've gained from my experiences or as participating in the youth?
Yeah.
I think there's definitely been a lot of experience and just lessons I've learned as a part of the OCCA youth. I think starting back from the first meeting that I've helped to host or participate in was during our One World You and Me series during COVID-19. I think that was definitely the start where I transitioned from, I guess, being a Chinese school student in the past to more of an active member in the greater community. And it opened my eyes and allowed me to see all the things that our community has done to band together and support each other. For example, during the height of COVID-19, I believe Mr. Andy Chen helped to like deliver masks, and many community members helped to deliver masks and PPE to our like OCCA members. And from those meetings, like for example, we hosted an APHM meeting in 2020, and it allowed me to learn from the different perspectives of adults in our OCCA community, from Dr. Du Jinyan, Mr. Andy Chen, and even Senator Scoofus, who came in to see and talk about our experience. And I think OCCA definitely has allowed me to embrace my culture more and just be comfortable with who I am and learn more about myself and my identity.
Jeff, can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, first of all, thank you for having me in this discussion session. I learned a lot from your kid. And one thing that I want to say to you is that you are the second generation of us. You are the second generation of new generation Chinese immigrants. So you have more than one reason to proud of yourselves. You are not Amy Tan of Joy Luck Club. Do you know Joy Luck Club?
Yeah, I read it this year in English class.
Yeah, so Amy Tan is second generation, but you guys are not her. You are second generation of us. So you have a higher base to start with, and you have a brighter future. And actually, you guys are very talented. And I couldn't agree more with what Roger said, that keep on your Chinese. During my almost 20 years of teaching in a college, I've seen a lot of Asian kids, like kids from Malaysia, Vietnam, Asian kids, not Chinese kids. Okay, they always come back to my class in their senior year because they're ready for they're ready for their job hunting, and they have Asian face, and then people expect that they can speak Chinese. So they come back in their senior year for the Chinese class. I've seen them almost every semester. So keep on your Chinese. You don't have to, well, you cannot change the skin, the color of your skin, and you don't have to. It's so unnecessary. I mean, Chinese culture it's in your whole appearance, and it's in your blood too, regardless of you recognize it or not. But besides the language, I hope you guys can discover more, like how Chinese culture have its influences in Western culture. You will be surprised. If you dig into it, you will be surprised. Example, today's like you know, government I mean, people will take exams to get government positions today in Europe, in England, and in America. You know that there is like a testing system for you to pass certain tests and get into get positions in the government. And that whole system, the whole structure of the system came from China on 17th century. Okay, that's one example. And there are more. So I hope you can dig into it, learn more about it. Then you will find that you have more than one reason to be proud being a Chinese descendant. Okay, and all right, so that's pretty much it about what I want to say. So I really appreciate that you guys include me in this discussion tonight. I think I gotta go now. I'm a little I'm really a little bit tired from a whole day of final. Today's my today's final final session in the university. So I think I will say goodbye and good night to everybody. Keep up, kids. Enjoy your life and enjoy being a Chinese.
Thank you, Dr. Jianglan, for coming tonight and giving us all your wisdom and insight with your experience as a Chinese immigrant. Thank you. It's really appreciated.
Oh, one more thing, Rachel.
Yes, yeah.
You are now studying in Cornell, right?
Yeah, I'm finishing up my third year right now.
I have a student named Alias, I don't remember his last name. Okay, he's learning Chinese and Chinese literature and culture with me for 6 years. And now he's in Cornell, working on his PhD degree focusing on the subject of literature, comparative literature from Chinese immigrant and Hispanic immigrant. He's a Hispanic immigrant. He's a Hispanic immigrant descendant.
Okay, very cool. What's his name again? Maybe I'll reach out. He's one of your students. You said?
Alias, I can't remember his last name off the top of my head.
Okay, I can look him up in the department. Maybe he's one of your students. Yeah. Yes.
The first name is Elias. When he's in my class, in the second semester, I start to call him the Chinese name I gave him. So I never remember his real last name. I always call him a Chinese name.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Cornell has a pretty big language program here too. So
yes.
definitely.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe I'll see if I can find him. I know we have like a big look his name up. I'll say your name, Professor Scherr.
Okay, so I guess I will go now. Thank you, kids. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang.
Thank you, 江教授。
谢谢。
谢谢。
Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists tonight, or? If not, I want to be mindful of everyone's time as we are a little bit over. And as we wrap up our wonderful discussion, I hope everyone has learned something new about our Asian community. And I definitely have, or an aspect of our Asian identity. And I would like to, first of all, thank the panelists, Mr. Roger Tall, Ms. Katie Luo, and Ms. Rachel Scherr for giving their precious time to come speak with us tonight about Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We're really grateful to hear their experiences as Asian Americans and thoughtful insight. I would also like to thank Dr. Jiang Lan, Ms. He Chen, and Mr. Luo Hai for their continued support in this APA panel discussion and the OCCA youth as a whole. Thank you to Senator James Scoofus, Assemblyman Colin Schmidt, Dr. Jiang Lan, and Mr. Ken Chan for taking the time to give a few opening remarks, and Andy Wang for helping to record the Zoom meeting. Asian Americans have a long and rich history in this country, and while it is important to recognize the accomplishments of the AAPI community members, it is also crucial to stand up and speak out against injustices that we may face in America. Thank you to all our OCCA and greater community members for joining us tonight to listen to this insightful and important panel discussion. And I just want to wish everyone a great night and a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
This is great. Yeah.
Hope everyone has
Thank you, Jeffrey.
We're really enjoying your event. Thank you for
Very good event.
yeah
Thank you, guys.
coming. Yeah.